It's sometimes referred to as Vancouver's first suburb, as it was one of the first areas of the city developed outside the downtown core. Today, Mount Pleasant is known for its unusual stores, heritage buildings, and artistic residents. Now, this venerable neighborhood is the subject of a new book, in fact, the first in a series of guidebooks dubbed Mount Pleasant Stories, Historical Walking Tours. Joining me now is author and heritage advocate Christine Hagemoen. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
First off, Christine, what drew you to Mount Pleasant in particular?
Well, I have a family history here, and I actually live in the neighborhood now. I moved here in 2015 and I live in a 1912 heritage building. But I actually briefly lived here in the 90s as a student, so in Mount Pleasant. And also I have my own family history going back to 1926 down in Lower Mount Pleasant, sort of at East 6th and Ontario area. And then one time I found out that my grandmother, I was looking through the city directories, and my grandmother, who I called Nana, lived directly across the street from me on Ontario here. So, I'm in my building, and then I realized, oh my God, there's the house that my grandmother once lived in. 75 years ago, we were neighbors, sort of thing. So it's just through my family history and then living in an area, I got to sort of be interested in Mount Pleasant's history. I also got connected with the Mount Pleasant Heritage Group. It's actually kind of an interesting little story, because I was working at the Vancouver Archives at the time, and this woman came in doing building history, and I was helping her out, and she asked me about helping her with a certain address, and she gave me the address, and I said, wait a second, I live there. Why do you want to research my building? We got to talking, and it was part of a heritage project that the Heritage Group was putting on. And so then I decided, it'd be interesting to join them. And so I got myself even more into the history of Mount Pleasant through my association with them. So that's sort of how I got into Mount Pleasant history.
Now, you point out, unlike Strathcona, the West End, or Chinatown, very few walking tour guides and histories of Mount Pleasant exist, yet as you point out, it has as rich a history as any of those neighborhoods. But why do you think that is? Why do you think Mount Pleasant's kind of underreported? Is it a victim of bad PR, perhaps?
I think so, maybe. I don't know. It's interesting, because I think one of the reasons I think Mount Pleasant doesn't have that sort of knowledge of being quite having a really interesting history is that it's sort of in the middle of the city, and it's sort of a neighborhood that you go through. There's so many roads that intersect the city. Once where there were streams, now there are roads. And so I think it sort of gets sort of pushed aside, or it's just as an afterthought as you go through. I also think, excuse me, I also think that it sort of lacks the, what happens is a lot of times in Mount Pleasant, things change so quickly. So it's often evolving, and, families don't necessarily stay here a long time. And so I think it's just sort of that movement of the physical movement, and then the sort of the movement of the industries and things like that. So there's not that stability like say Chinatown has, and Strathcona. So I think it just loses it just doesn't get the respect it deserves, So I hope to change that.
So Mount Pleasant, as you point out, has 5 distinct areas, but rather than write the War and Peace of historical guidebooks, as you put it, this first volume concentrates on its heritage heart.
Yeah.
How do we define that?
So physically, it's sort of defined, you could say 12th Avenue, but certainly between, I would say 12th Avenue along Main, and then, it's crossed by Broadway and Main, all the way down to about 7th, and that's where Kingsway sort of pokes in. So that whole area, like 7th Avenue was the first cross street in Mount Pleasant, or in this side of the creek. And so it sort of evolved around that area, and it's specifically where Main and Kingsway meet, is that sort of triangle plot of land. And that sort of is considered the heart of the neighborhood, and then it sort of spreads out from there. And then the creek sort of follows along that same route, almost it crosses Main twice as it moves down towards False Creek, or as it moved down before False Creek. And so the industries grew around the stream or the creek, and then also just that intersection. And so it just sort of grew out of that area. So that's the heart of it. That's the commercial heart. And then so I just thought that was a good place to start. Also, it's kind of threatened right now with, with so much development with the subway and speculation about building heights and things like that. So I thought it was a good place to start and a good reminder of people how the neighborhood started.
Well, it's great that you say that, because my next question talks about how the heritage heart of Mount Pleasant is under threat from gentrification, from the Broadway subway line. As you write in the book, Mount Pleasant can't just survive these changes, it must find a way to thrive despite them. Mm-hmm. How do you think it can do that?
Well, with advocacy, I mean, my pals at the Mount Pleasant Heritage Group, we've been working for several years now trying to get the heart, as we branded it. And actually, this was in a lot of previous studies and neighborhood plans that they identified the heritage heart of Mount Pleasant as that area I spoke about. And so we just wanted to, we gathered and we've been working for several years trying to having talks with city people and the planning department and trying to get people aware of this situation, that these buildings, because ideally people like to build towers and things like that around subway stations. I don't know why. Personally, I wouldn't want to live right next to a subway station, close, but not right on it. And so that area, because it's the buildings range generally in that one sort of between 10th Avenue or Broadway and 7th, that little sort of core along Main, they range from 1880s anyway, to 1947. Those, like a majority of the buildings are within that sort of group. So they're kind of threatened as a sort of a heritage core. And because people, developers have bought up a lot of the buildings that are heritage buildings there. I'm not sure why, I guess under the assumption that one day they'd be able to redevelop the property. So, we have to be careful that we don't lose those properties in that area. And we're not talking about preserving the whole of Mount Pleasant, that would be ridiculous, but just those few blocks along Main and a little bit along Broadway and Kingsway where they meet, I think that's worth saving, because it's quite a cohesive set of buildings that actually date from the dates I was talking about. So it's threatened because there's just been so many changes, and so it's the future is unknown. And of course, we had that giant fire in October of 2020, and that physically destroyed a building. So there's always that threat too. So it's hard to say, but it's certainly under threat, and we'd like to help not make it so.
Well, there's some soon to be missing heritage as well. The City Center Motel up on 2111 Main, built in 1954, a good example of mid-century Vancouver, built for the Empire Games, as I found out in your book. It's being used as artistic studios now, but its fate not very certain beyond that, of course.
Exactly. And that's another thing. I mean, it's great that, when I wrote the book, it was just at the time as I was final editing, that they said that the Motor Hotel was being sold or had sold. And I just thought, oh no, and I have to update my book. And then, so I had to sort of squeeze that one line in there. And then just about a week after we sent it to the printer, it was already, oh, now we're going to have these artist studios. But of course, they're only for a few years. So you kind of forget. And, what I loved about the Motor Hotel, I know it was a bit grotty at times, and I'm sure there's a bit suspect, but it spoke to a different time, when Kingsway was the big thoroughfare for cars, and it was part of the highway. And, there were so many car-based businesses and travel-based motels along its route. So it was just nice to have that one little aspect of that. And I think that, I have friends that have studios in the motel now, and they're really enjoying the space, but it's just too bad that it's not a permanent situation. I think that would be excellent.
You also list off a number of examples of missing heritage, places that matter, if you will, that are no longer there. The Cellar Jazz Club in particular, I love this because you point out that Charles Mingus famously hit a BC Lion over the head with a toilet plunger there once. And of course, the Cellar, at one time, one of the premier jazz clubs in North America. How important is it to point out what we've lost as well?
I think it's really important because you don't have reminders. There's not a building there to say, oh yeah, what was going on there? So it's important to know that, the history isn't just what you see. It includes sort of the stories or the intangible histories that we no longer can see. And it shows how the neighborhood developed. And so you understand why things are the way they are, even though you can't see them physically, touch them or experience them. You get that sense, but if you look closely, there's often clues around that you can read. They can see the lay of the land of where the creek might have been because of there's slopey bits. But with the jazz club, that was such a important period in Mount Pleasant's history. It was, a premium jazz club that was in the basement, which was built. The basement was there because because the ravine of the Brewery Creek allowed them to dig down easily. And then at a time when a lot of, jazz musicians would be visiting, they could stay at the city center motel. So, it was very convenient. So it's important to include those because, I forget. So if you don't have reminders, it's so fleeting. If people don't get their stories out there, we won't know because there's no way of figuring it out. Once it's gone, you don't have that aide memoire of, oh yeah, that building, that was important because of this. But, once it's gone, again, you need to have, books like mine or other avenues of remembrance to remember how things were and bring out the stories from the past.
Now, you've been writing about and taking pictures of Mount Pleasant for years. Was there anything new and exciting you discovered over the course of researching this book?
Yeah, there was lots of stuff, almost too much stuff. I mean, I couldn't, that's why I had to do it in stages, the book, because I was just discovering all sorts of interesting facts, and having to narrow it down was just proving impossible. I started with 5 tours, and then I'm narrowing it down to just the one, which I produced. But that was 10,000 words, and there still was so much stuff that I wanted to put in. And that's why I kind of put in what I called fun facts, is because you could get a little bit more history and interesting little snippets in there, and without actually having to go in a full explanation and adding even more text. So that was sort of my way of sneaking in a few more interesting stories. But one story that I really I didn't know about until I started researching it was about the Wallace family. So JB and Marie Wallace lived on 10th Avenue at 230, I think it was 230 East 10th, just where Watson Street is. And they lived there from 1908 to 1944. And J.B. Wallace and Marie Alba Stark Wallace. So Marie was the second youngest daughter of the Sylvia Esty Stark and Louis Stark, who were early Black pioneers who settled on Salt Spring Island in the 1860s. And then she met and married, American-born JB, and they married in 1897. And then they moved to Mount Pleasant in around 1908. So they lived in this house that, of course, is no longer there. But it was just interesting to find out, their life. JB owned a successful janitorial contractor business. He was a leader in the Vancouver's early Black community. The Wallaces were very active members of the Fountain AME Chapel that's in Strathcona. Marie was part of a group of women, including Jimi Hendrix's grandmother, who were canvassed for funds in 1921 to raise money so they could purchase the building. He was active. He was a Sunday school superintendent. So it's just interesting to learn about the people that you wouldn't necessarily know about, who are different. That not just the old English or Scottish families, but there was quite a variety of different ethnic groups and religious groups that had their homes in Strathcona, in Mount Pleasant. And so it was interesting to find how large these communities actually were.
And finally, Christine, what do you hope the reader gets out of the book? Perhaps a new appreciation of the neighborhood?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I hope they get inspired to go and exploring their own neighborhood and this neighborhood. And I hope people, we use in the future to bring people actively to participate in the built history of the neighborhoods like Mount Pleasant, to learn about the people who lived, worked, and did business there. I think walking tours are great because it's active learning and you can make your own discoveries along the way. There's a lot of little interesting features along the way that I didn't actually talk about, I wanted to include. But you can discover new interesting facts about a neighborhood when you go out there and then you start looking. So I want people to sort of, look and read and learn more about the neighborhood. So I hope they get that. Go out and explore the Mount Pleasant and other neighborhoods.
All right. The name of the book is Mount Pleasant Stories, Historical Walking Tours, Walk 1, Mount Pleasant's Heritage Hearts. My thanks to author Christine Hagemoen.
Thank you.